Welcome back to the deep dive. You ready to do some time traveling?
Always up for an adventure. Where are we headed this time?
Ancient India. We're going to explore the Gupta Empire.
Ooh, the Guptas. Now, that's a period packed with fascinating stuff.
It is, and it's a pretty important one if you're prepping for the UPSC exam.
Ah, yes, that GS1 ancient history section. The Guptas are a big part of that.
Absolutely. We've got inscriptions to decode.
Historical accounts to untangle.
Even traveler's tales to bring it all to life.
A real treasure trove of sources.
So what's our mission in this deep dive? Well, we got to figure out why this era is called a golden age.
Right, because every golden age has its complexities, doesn't it?
Exactly. We'll uncover how the Guptas rose to power, what they accomplished, and what ultimately led to their downfall.
It's like piecing together a giant puzzle, with each source revealing a new clue.
Think of it as your crash course in Gupta history, but way more exciting than a textbook.
Much more engaging than just memorizing dates and names.
So let's fire up our time machine and set the coordinates for 4th century CE.
All right, where are we landing?
Picture the fertile plains of eastern Uttar Pradesh and Bihar.
Not exactly a palace or a battlefield, is it?
Nope. But this is where the Gupta story begins.
And it all starts with a rather unexpected resource. Iron ore.
Iron ore. That doesn't sound very glamorous for an empire.
It might not sound like much, but those early Guptas were pretty clever.
How so?
They used those local iron ore resources to build their power base.
It's a good reminder that empires aren't always built on grand armies.
Sometimes it's about strategically using what you've got right where you are.
So we've got a raw material, iron ore. But how do we get from there to an empire?
Enter Chandragupta, the founder of the dynasty.
Now, Chandragupta himself is a bit of a mystery figure. We don't know a ton about him.
True, but his successors, now those are the stars of our show.
Okay, so who kicks things off?
That would be Chandragupta era, the first emperor of the Gupta dynasty.
So how does he go from local chief to emperor?
This guy was a master strategist.
Give us the details.
Well, first, he made some very strategic marriages, particularly with the
Lichavas.
a powerful clan in the region. This alliance wasn't just about love,
It was a power move.
Absolutely. It expanded his territory, boosted his influence, and solidified his authority.
Talk about a strategic wedding.
And he wasn't done yet?
More conquest.
Oh, yeah. He expanded his kingdom through military campaigns.
And where did he set up shop, so to speak?
He established his capital at Pataliputra, which is modern-day Patna.
So he's got the alliances, the territory, the capital city.
He even started minting coins with his and his queen's images.
A power couple immortalized in gold.
But hold on tight, because things are about to get really epic.
Oh, who are we meeting next?
Samudra, Chandragupta's son and a warrior king if there ever was one.
I've heard of this guy. Wasn't he like the Alexander the Great of India?
He had that kind of ambition, that's for sure.
And his exploits are immortalized on that famous Allahabad pillar inscription. Right.
The very same. And here's the thing that really makes this inscription special.
Tell me.
It's on the same pillar as Ashoka's edicts.
Whoa, wait a minute. Ashoka, like the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka.
One and the same. That pillar connects Samudragupta to one of India's most influential figures.
Talk about wanting to leave your mark on history. So what did Samudragupta do to earn a spot on that pillar?
Well, for starters, his reign extended over a huge chunk of the Indian subcontinent.
How huge are we talking?
From Punjab in the north, all the way down to the Pallava kingdom in the south.
That's a serious empire.
He was a conqueror, no doubt, but he was also a clever diplomat.
So not just brute force.
He used a mix of direct control, alliances, and tributary systems to maintain his vast empire.
Smart. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Something like that. Oh, and don't forget, he was also known as king among poets.
Wait, a warrior and a poet? This guy's got it all.
It seems so. He was a man of culture as well as a military leader.
Okay, so we've got a warrior poet king expanding the empire. Who comes next in this Gupta dynasty?
That would be Chandragupta II, Samudragupta's son, known for his diplomacy and strategic brilliance.
Okay, give us an example of his brilliance.
Well, he managed to control the Vakataka kingdom without even lifting a sword.
Really? How'd he pull that off?
He married his daughter, Prabhavata, to a Vakataka prince.
Ah, another strategic marriage.
A genius move. It gave him influence over a vast region without the bloodshed and chaos of war.
Less war, more wedding cake. I like his style.
And he didn't stop there. He also skillfully snatched control of western regions.
Which regions are we talking about?
Places like Malwa and Gujarat, he took them from the Shakas, further expanding the Gupta Empire.
This guy clearly knew how to play the game of power.
He certainly did, and to top it all off, he adopted those impressive titles.
Like Vikramaditya, right? I remember reading about that.
Exactly, titles that signified his strength and authority.
Plus, wasn't he a big supporter of the arts and sciences?
A huge patron. Think of his court as a magnet for brilliant minds.
A Gupta-era think tank.
That's a great way to put it. And it's here we meet the legendary Navratnas.
The Natnas. Refresh my memory.
The 9 gems of Chandragupta II's court. Imagine being a fly on the wall during their discussions.
I'd love to hear those conversations. Who were some of these gems?
You had literary giants like Kalidasa.
Kalidasa, the author of Abhidhamma Shakuntalam.
That's the one. And alongside him, scientific minds like Varahamihira.
Varahamihira, the astronomer and mathematician.
Precisely. It was a truly vibrant intellectual scene.
Okay, before we get lost in the brilliance of the Navratnas, there's one more ruler we need to talk about.
What's that?
Kumaragupta I. He ruled after Chandragupta II, and he had a pretty impressive resume himself.
I remember him. He performed those elaborate Ashvamedha sacrifices.
Right, those horse sacrifices were a big deal. It was all about showcasing imperial power.
Exactly. But Kumaragupta, I also did something else that's incredibly significant, especially for our UPSC listeners.
Okay, tell me more. What did he do?
He founded Nalanda University.
Nalanda. Now, that's a name that every UPSC aspirant needs to know.
It wasn't just any university. It was a global hub of learning.
A global hub, even back then.
Think students and scholars flocking to Nalanda from all corners of Asia.
They came from that far away to study in India.
They did. They came to study everything from philosophy and religion to medicine and astronomy.
It's like a ancient Indian version of Oxford or Harvard.
In a way, yes. It really highlights the Gupta era's focus on knowledge and intellectual exchange.
Nalanda is definitely a high point, but our sources tell us there's also a shadow lurking in this golden age.
What do you mean?
We need to talk about the caste system.
Ah, yes. That's where the picture gets a bit more complicated.
How so?
Well, the Gupta era saw a formalization of the caste system.
Formalization? In what way?
Through the practice of endogamy, marrying within one's caste.
So social mobility between castes became even more difficult.
It did, unfortunately, and this is a development with long-lasting consequences, something that UPSC aspirants should definitely explore further.
Okay, so we've got warrior kings, shrewd diplomats, patrons of education, and a complex social hierarchy, all emerging during the Guptas' rise to power. It's a story full of triumphs, but also contradictions.
And we're just getting started. There's so much more to uncover about the Guptas and their legacy.
And we'll do just that when we continue our deep dive into the Gupta Empire. Stay tuned.
All right, so we've established the Guptas built this sprawling empire, but this golden age wasn't just about powerful rulers and military conquests.
Right. What else made this era so golden?
It was a time of incredible cultural flourishing. Art, architecture, literature, even science reached new heights.
Let's dive into that. But first, I'm curious about religion during this era.
Okay, good question. Our sources tell us the Guptas were Hindu rulers.
So, did everyone in the empire have to follow Hinduism?
That's what's interesting. Despite being devout Hindus themselves, the Guptas were actually remarkably tolerant of other religions. Buddhists and Jains were free to practice their faiths.
So no forced conversions or anything like that?
It seems not. And we even see evidence of a vibrant exchange of ideas between different religious traditions.
That's pretty impressive for that era.
It suggests a more inclusive and open-minded approach to governance, which probably helped those different schools of thought and artistic expressions flourish.
Makes sense. A diverse society often breeds creativity, right?
Exactly. Now, are you ready for the cultural highlights?
Hit me with them. Where do we even begin?
Well, we have to mention Nalanda University again.
Nalanda. Right, Kumaragupta founded it.
But it's worth emphasizing its global significance. It wasn't just a center of Buddhist learning, it was a magnet for scholars from all over.
Like, how far are we talking?
As far as China and Korea, think about it. Scholars from all these different cultures and backgrounds, all gathered in one place, debating, sharing knowledge, pushing the boundaries of human understanding.
The intellectual energy must have been incredible.
Oh, absolutely. And the variety of subjects they taught at Nalanda was mind-blowing.
Like what? Give me the rundown.
Philosophy, religion, astronomy, medicine, mathematics, you name it, they probably studied it there.
A true melting pot of knowledge.
It really showcases that commitment to education and scholarship during the Gupta era.
But didn't we also say that the caste system became more rigid during this time?
Ah, that's a good point.
It seems like a contradiction, right? All this progress and yet this rigid social hierarchy.
It's a reminder that even the most glorious periods have their complexities and limitations.
True, true. So, yeah, there were amazing intellectual achievements, but there was also that strengthening of the caste system, and that had a long-lasting impact.
Something UPSC aspirants should definitely keep in mind.
Okay, so it's a story of progress, but also limitations, all intertwined.
Exactly.
Now, I remember we touched upon some Gupta rulers who were, shall we say, quite fond of Buddhism.
Oh, yes, even though they were Hindu rulers.
We talked about Narasimhagupta Bhattacharya, right?
Yeah.
Yes, he was a devout follower of Mahayana Buddhism.
What did he do to show his devotion?
He went all out. He constructed a magnificent monastery at Nalanda and a towering temple as well.
Wow, that's commitment.
And his son, Vajra, continued that tradition of Buddhist patronage.
So even within the ruling family, you have this diversity of religious beliefs.
It shows how nuanced the religious landscape was during the Gupta era, which is definitely something you could highlight in your UPSC exam.
It's a good reminder that people, even powerful rulers, aren't always easily categorized, right? They can hold multiple beliefs and support different traditions.
Absolutely. It speaks to a more fluid and layered understanding of religious identity than we often give credit for.
Okay, so we've got this world-class university, royal patronage of both Hinduism and Buddhism, and a complex social hierarchy.
But we haven't even scratched the surface of Gupta art, architecture, and literature yet.
Okay, then take me there. Paint me a picture of Gupta art.
Close your eyes and imagine graceful sculptures of the Buddha carved from sandstone or cast in bronze. Serene expressions, flowing robes, reflecting those spiritual ideals of the time.
I can practically see them in a museum,
And they weren't just religious icons, they were masterpieces of art, you know?
showing off the incredible skill of those Gupta artisans.
Exactly. Now picture this. A Gupta-era temple.
Okay, I'm picturing it. What's it look like?
Intricate carvings, towering shikaras, those temple towers, and elaborate mandapas, pillared halls.
So they were master builders as well as skilled sculptors. Now I gotta ask, did they have their own Shakespeare or Homer?
They had Kalidasa.
Kalidasa, right, the Navratna, the gem of Chandragupta II's court.
His works are essential to the Gupta Golden Age.
I know we mentioned Abhideshakuntalam earlier, but what else did he write?
Well, there's the epic poem Raghuvamsha. Both of those are considered masterpieces of Sanskrit literature.
And they're still relevant today.
They explore those universal themes. Love, duty, heroism, the human condition. Their appeal goes beyond their historical context.
Wow, I need to add those to my reading list.
And it wasn't all poetry and drama. There was a flourishing of religious and philosophical texts, scientific work.
Even political texts, right?
Yes. The Arthashastra gained new prominence during the Gupta era.
It's like this era was overflowing with intellectual curiosity.
A real thirst for knowledge.
Did they make any big scientific breakthroughs?
Absolutely. They made advancements in astronomy, mathematics, and medicine.
Okay, give me names. Who should I be looking at?
For the UPSC exam, definitely know about Aryabhata.
Aryabhata. Remind me what he did.
He was this brilliant mathematician and astronomer. Get this. He calculated the value of pi, and he proposed that the Earth revolves around the sun.
Wait, the heliocentric theory? That's way before Copernicus.
I know, right? It just goes to show you how advanced scientific thinking was in ancient India.
Mind-blowing. Anyone else we should know about?
In medicine, there's Sushruta.
And what does Sushruta do?
He wrote the Sushruta Samhita, which is considered a foundational text on surgery.
So they were pioneers in so many fields.
Their legacy continues to inspire us even today.
It's amazing what they accomplished in just a few centuries. But even golden ages have to end sometime, right?
Unfortunately, yes. Nothing lasts forever. Not even the mightiest empires.
So how did this empire start to crumble? What were the cracks in the foundation?
Well, one of the biggest blows came from outside, the invasion of the Hunas.
The Hunas. Wait, are we talking about the same Hunas who rampaged through Europe? Attila the Hun and all that?
Yep, the very same. They swept through Central Asia and into India.
And they took on the Guptas.
They did, and they posed a major threat. Those repeated invasions took their toll both militarily and economically.
But surely the Guptas wouldn't have just crumbled because of one enemy, right?
Mm.
No matter how fierce.
You're right, it was a combination of factors.
Okay, so what else was going on? What internal problems were brewing?
Well, one issue was the rise of feudalism.
Feudalism. How did that weaken the Guptas?
Remember, as the empire grew, the Guptas granted land to regional governors and military chiefs.
Right, in exchange for loyalty and service.
Exactly. But over time, those regional powers got a little too powerful. a little too independent.
They started challenging the central Gupta authority.
That's right. It was a classic case of too much decentralization weakening the core.
Okay, so we've got internal divisions and those pesky Huna invasions. Was there a problem with leadership as well?
It definitely played a role. After Chandragupta,
Who valiantly fended off those early Huna attacks.
yes. But after him, you get a series of weaker rulers.
Who couldn't hold it all together.
Exactly. They lacked that strength and vision needed to navigate all those internal and external challenges.
So you've got internal divisions, weak leadership, and these relentless Huna invasions.
It's not looking good for the Guptas at this point.
And how did the economy fare during all this?
Well, those Huna invasions disrupted trade routes, which hurt, and the Guptas lost some key territories.
Fewer taxes coming in, I imagine.
Exactly. And that, combined with the internal conflicts and some administrative inefficiencies, led to a decline in revenue.
So they're struggling to pay the army, fund the administration, keep everything running smoothly.
It was downward spiral. Invasions, weak leadership, internal conflicts, and a shrinking economy.
All feeding into each other.
It's a tough situation to recover from.
Is there anything they could have done differently, looking back?
That's the question historians have been debating for ages. Some argue that if they'd focused on strengthening their central authority,
Reining in those feudal lords.
all right, and promoting greater unity within the ruling family itself, they might have weathered the storm.
Hindsight is 20/20.
Isn't it always?
But it's still important to learn from the past.
Absolutely. Studying the decline of empires, like the Guptas, offers valuable lessons.
For leaders of any era.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of strong leadership, a united front, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances.
All right, so we've covered their rise, their golden age, and what caused their decline. But we need to zoom in on something we haven't talked much about.
What's that?
The lives of ordinary people. What was it actually like to live in Gupta India, beyond the palaces and battlefields?
It's a crucial part of the story. History isn't just about kings and queens and wars. It's about the everyday lives of people.
So let's shift our focus from the emperors to the people.
Let's see how those economic activities and social systems shaped their lives.
All right, where do we begin?
Well, luckily, we have some valuable insights into Gupta economics thanks to Fahin.
Fahin, that Chinese traveler.
Yep. He journeyed through India during Chandragupta II's reign, and he kept meticulous records.
So what did he have to say about the economic landscape? Was it really a golden age for everyone?
Well, according to Fahin, the heartland of the Gupta Empire, Magadha, was a prosperous region.
What did he see that made him think that?
He described flourishing cities, a bustling economy, and the wealthy engaged in charity and social responsibility.
Sounds pretty positive. But what about the average person? Were they sharing in this prosperity?
To understand that, we have to look at the specifics of their economic activities and systems. And one thing that stands out is their coinage.
Right. They're gold dinars. We know they minted a ton of those.
They did. And their gold coinage was particularly interesting.
What was so special about it?
Well, their dinars were famous for their consistent weight and purity. Meaning they had a well-regulated and sophisticated monetary system.
I get it. And those coins often featured images of the Gupta kings, right?
Exactly. So they weren't just currency, they were also a way to project power and authority.
Visual reminders of who's in charge.
Exactly. And being able to produce so many gold coins points to a strong economy, right? They also issued silver coins.
Silver coins. What were those used for?
Primarily for local trade, especially after they conquered Gujarat. Copper coins, on the other hand, seem to have been less common than during earlier periods.
Interesting. So the coinage gives us clues about their economic health, but were there any downsides to all this economic success?
That's a good question. The evidence actually suggests that long-distance trade declined during this period.
Declined. Compared to when?
Compared to earlier eras, like during the Kushan Empire.
Why the decline? Did something happen?
It seems that trade with the Eastern Roman Empire decreased.
And why would that happen? Political tensions.
It seems the Eastern Romans figured out how to produce silk themselves.
So they didn't need to rely on Indian imports anymore.
Exactly. And that had ripple effects throughout the Gupta Empire.
So it's not just about silk. This decline in trade impacted people's livelihoods.
It did. For example, silk weavers in Western India had to adapt.
Because they'd lost their biggest market.
Right. Some even migrated to other regions, like Mandsaur in Malwa.
So they had to find new ways to make a living.
It highlights how connected the Gupta Empire was to those global trade networks.
They weren't an isolated bubble.
Exactly. Now, another interesting economic shift during this time was the rise of priestly landlords,
Priestly landlords.
especially in eastern and central Madhya Pradesh. Brahmanas were given these large land grants.
Okay, and they used that land for agriculture.
Right, which led to the expansion of agriculture into new areas.
Sounds like a win-win. More land under cultivation, more food production.
But there's a catch. While those land grants benefited the Brahmanas,
Someone had to work that land.
exactly, and often it was local tribal peasants who were pushed further down the social ladder.
So progress for some came at a cost for others.
Unfortunately, that's a pattern we see throughout history. And on top of that, peasants in some regions were also subject to forced labor.
Forced labor, what was that called?
Vishti. So the economic picture wasn't entirely rosy for everyone,
Right, there were winners and losers.
just like in any society.
Okay, so we've explored those economic ups and downs. Now let's delve into their social structure. We know the caste system was a big deal, but what were the dynamics between different social groups?
Well, remember, the Gupta era saw that strengthening of the caste system through endogamy,
Marrying within one's caste.
which meant social mobility was basically impossible.
You were stuck in the caste you were born into,
Pretty much. And the Brahmanas, the priestly class, were at the top.
enjoying all the privileges.
They received those vast land grants, which boosted their economic and social clout.
Makes sense.
And they also play a key role in legitimizing Gupta rule.
How so?
They portrayed the kings as divinely appointed, reinforcing that idea of a divinely ordained social order.
So they were religious and political power players.
Exactly.
Where did the other castes fit in?
Well, next in line were the Kshatriyas.
The warriors and rulers?
Then came the Vaisyas, the merchants and traders, followed by the Shudras, who were laborers and service providers.
And sadly, at the very bottom, the untouchables.
Those considered outside the caste system altogether.
We know untouchability is a dark chapter in India's history. Did their situation worsen during the Gupta era?
Unfortunately, it seems their numbers actually increased.
Really?
Fahim even mentions the Chandalas in his accounts.
Who were they?
They lived outside the villages, performing tasks considered polluting, like handling dead animals or working with leather.
So despite all the cultural and intellectual achievements, there was also this hardening of social divisions.
It's a reminder that progress doesn't always benefit everyone equally.
Okay, so now for the big question. Did the status of women improve at all during this golden age?
That's a great question. It's a complicated issue with both limitations and some glimmers of progress.
Okay, unpack it for me.
Yeah.
What were some of the limitations women faced?
For women of higher castes, like Brahmana and Kshatriya women, their lives were mostly restricted to the domestic sphere.
They couldn't work outside the home.
Not really. They didn't have independent sources of income.
Unlike women of lower castes who had to work to support their families.
Exactly.
So their social standing determined their freedom. Were there any legal restrictions on women's rights?
Well, there weren't specific laws barring them from owning property, but patriarchal norms often limited their inheritance rights.
Especially when it came to land.
Right, which meant they were economically dependent on their fathers, husbands, or sons.
So they faced social and economic barriers. But you mentioned glimmers of progress.
Yes. One interesting development was that the concept of stridhana gained greater recognition.
Stridhana. I'm not familiar with that term.
It refers to a woman's personal property, things like gifts received during marriage, certain inheritances.
So they had some control over their own wealth.
Exactly. It wasn't full equality, but it was a step in the right direction, and it's a detail worth noting for the UPSC exam. Women were even allowed to sell or mortgage their stridhana,
So they had some degree of economic agency.
even within a patriarchal society.
What about widow remarriage? Was that allowed?
That was a tricky issue. It was prohibited for higher caste women, but allowed among Shudras.
So once again, your caste determined your options.
Unfortunately, yes. There was also the practice of niyoga,
Yoga. What's that?
where a younger brother or kinsman could marry the widow of his elder brother.
Ah, I see. To keep the property within the family.
Right. But it obviously didn't give the woman much choice in the matter.
It's a good example of how cultural practices can be beneficial for some, but very limiting for others.
And it highlights how social norms, economic realities, and religious beliefs all intersected.
To shape people's lives.
Exactly. So even during this golden age, women's lives were still bound by patriarchal norms.
It's a reminder that social change is a slow and often uneven process.
Even during periods of great progress, Those traditional power structures and beliefs can linger.
It's a good reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's messy, it's complicated.
And that's what makes studying it so fascinating. It forces us to grapple with those complexities and nuances.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground. We've seen the Guptas rise, achieve great things, face challenges, and ultimately decline.
It's been a whirlwind tour of a pivotal period in Indian history.
But before we completely wrap up, let's do a quick recap for our listeners prepping for that UPSC exam.
Great idea. Let's make sure they've got the key takeaways. All right, UPSC preppers, listen up. You want to ace that GS1 ancient history section. You got to master the Guptas.
Give us the cheat sheet. What are the absolute must-knows about this era?
First and foremost, chronology. You have to know the timeline.
Okay, timeline. What specifically do we need to know?
Key rulers, obviously, their major achievements, and roughly when they reigned.
So it's not enough to know what they did, we need to know when they did it.
Exactly. Chronology is the foundation for everything else.
Dates and names, got it. But the UPSC isn't just about memorizing facts, right? It's about understanding the why behind the what.
You got it. So when you're studying the Guptas' rise to power, don't just memorize battles.
Right. What should we be focusing on?
Think about how they built that empire, those strategic marriages.
Right, like Chandragupta I and the Lichabis.
Exactly. And remember how they used iron ore to build their power base?
Right. It wasn't all about conquering armies.
That's the kind of insight that'll impress those examiners.
So it's about connecting the dots, seeing the strategy.
Precisely. And don't underestimate the importance of administration and governance.
Right. The Guptas didn't just conquer, they had to rule that vast territory.
Exactly. So you need to understand their administrative structure.
Like all those different levels of officials.
And how they collected taxes. Think of it like a well-oiled machine.
With all those uparikas and vishayapatis and pustapalas, keeping everything running smoothly.
Exactly. And remember to keep that economic context in mind.
Right. The Guptas oversaw a period of prosperity with that sophisticated coinage system.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Remember that decline in long-distance trade?
Right. The Eastern Romans figured out how to make their own silk.
That's a key detail to remember.
Okay, so we got the political stuff, the economic context. Now let's talk about culture. Those dazzling achievements, that's got to be a major focus, right?
Oh, absolutely. Art, architecture, literature, science, it all flourished under the Guptas.
You can't forget Nalanda University.
Nalanda is essential. It had an international reputation, even back then.
Okay, so when we're studying culture, what should we be emphasizing?
Well, for starters, be able to describe specific examples.
Of art, architecture, literature.
Exactly. Know the names of key works, key figures, like Kalidasa and his masterpiece, Abhinashakuntalam.
And don't forget those scientific advancements.
Aryapada and his astronomical calculations, Sushruta and his contributions to surgery, those are must-knows.
Right. The Guptas were pioneers in so many fields.
But remember, you also have to acknowledge the complexities.
Right, those shadows we talked about.
The caste system, the limitations on women's roles, those are part of the Gupta story too.
The UPSC exam wants a nuanced understanding of history, not just the highlights.
Exactly. It's about painting a complete picture.
Right, so we've covered the rise, the achievements, the culture. Now let's talk about the decline. What are the main points our listeners need to remember?
Don't fall into the trap of thinking it was all about the Huna invasions.
Right, those fierce warriors from Central Asia.
Yeah, they were a major factor, yes. But don't overlook the internal problems.
Like the rise of feudalism, weak leadership.
All of those played a role in weakening the empire from within.
It was like a perfect storm of internal and external pressures.
Leading to that domino effect of decline.
Okay, so we've given our UPSC preppers a lot to think about. But even if you're not facing an exam, there's so much to learn from the Guptas, right?
Absolutely. Their story shows us that even the greatest empires are temporary, but their legacy can last for centuries.
It's a reminder that history isn't just about the past, it's about understanding the forces that shape our present.
Exactly.